All right, good morning, folks, and welcome to another edition of Friday Morning Live. Today is the 3rd of November, countdown to Thanksgiving and the Christmas season. So sit back and enjoy today's session with our friend Tom Doran with Reagan Consulting. We'll bring Tom on in a minute. Just want to take care of some housekeeping items. There you go, Dave Newell, your host today. Hope you're doing well. I'm a little nasally. North Florida had some cooler weather this week, so I'm feeling it in the sinus. But I'm doing well, feeling better than I sound. So just a reminder, each week we update the web-based instructor-led calendar on our website under the Education tab. Please take a look, and if you need some continuing ed and some classes that would certainly help you and grow professionally, we encourage you to take a look at that calendar on a weekly basis and see what's coming up as we round out the year for those that need CE for the end of the year. Next, we're going to take next week off, but the following week, during our travels, Kyle and I, a couple weeks ago out in Southeast Florida, we had a lot of discussion with members about rating and rating agencies. And of course, many of you know that Kroll has entered into our world. So Peter is coming on to talk about Kroll and how they rate carriers here in Florida, what their methodology is, and how they look at the Florida marketplace. So certainly put that on your calendar for November 17th to hear from Peter and his crew about the rating agency that they run, known as Kroll. December, we're still seeing if we can have some shows. We're probably going to have one because session is so early in January. So we're probably going to have something in December, talk about the legislative agenda that BG and Kyle and Laura and the rest of the team are working on as we begin 2024 legislative session. So just stay tuned for that. Just a reminder, because session is early, so is our Capitol Days. And you see the dates. Go in and look at those. Certainly, we're at a new venue this year at the AC Hotel Marriott. So please get online and reserve your room and then register either for the event or if you want to attend and play in the Young Agents Council Golf Tournament. That's always a fun event. So just get online and do those things, and we'll see you in January, hopefully. Again, a reminder, registrations are not quite open yet to register, but as we remind everybody each week, book your room. The Rose and Shingle is a very popular property for our members, so go ahead and reserve your room, and then when registrations open, you can certainly register for the convention in June. I will tell you, Cindy and I meet almost weekly about the breakout sessions, and so we are going to have a great lineup again this year, and certainly working on the keynote speakers and some other things, some other surprises for this year. So just keep that in mind. But those are the dates. Go ahead and book your room, and we'll see you certainly at convention in June, if not before. Today's topic is the best practices study that Reagan Consulting does with the Big I. And so we're going to bring our friend Tom Doran in. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Dave. Good to be with you.
You know, Tom's been a co-author of this study since 1993, which was its inception. And so Tom brings a lot of knowledge and experience, not only in the industry, but certainly as he looks at the data, looks at the information that's supplied by agents that contribute to the study. He's based in Atlanta, Georgia. You know, the Reagan Consulting, as I said this a few weeks ago with Roger Sitkins, you know, Reagan Consultants been around our campfire for a long time as well. And I know Tom and his group have worked with many agents here in Florida. So some of you have may may have met Tom along the way. If not, there's a picture of Tom and so on and so forth. But Tom, as I transition over to give you privileges, we do that right now. There you go. And I'm going to give you privileges. You know, we're rounding out this conversation about the best practices study that started when Kyle and I were down in Southeast Florida doing some events, town hall meetings, and Roger Sitkins was with us. And Roger used this as a backdrop of some of his talks. And then last week, Brent Kelly came on and certainly used the best practices study as some of the conversation that he was talking about. So I thought it'd be best to, to put a bow on this and bring the author on to talk about the best practices and why it matters. So, Tom, you got privileges. Go ahead and start your slideshow.
All right.
And
tell me if you now see the master slide, Dave.
You got to do your display settings again. There you go. And now, perfect. There you go, Tom.
Okay. Good. Well, it's good to be with you guys, and happy Friday. It's been a long, strange journey. Hard to believe, 30 years that we've been doing the best practices study. I actually joined Reagan Consulting in 1993. So
Wow.
30 years.
Wow.
Just at my 30-year anniversary, and one of the first jobs that I worked on with Bobby Reagan and Shirley Lukens. I know many of your listeners will remember that name.
Yep.
Her contribution to the Big I back in the day. One of the first projects I worked on with Reagan was the development of the first best practices study. And so, it's been a long time. It's interesting to think back to the world we lived in 1993. So much has changed, but I thought it might be interesting to see, have a little quiz here before we dive into the world of 1993 and see if folks on the webinar can answer a few questions about the insurance environment in 1993. It's a
Be sure to type it in the question pane, your answers, as Tom goes through these next few slides.
Yeah, so what was the most commonly used agency management system in 1993? So 30 years ago. And I'll give you just a second there. You don't have to type it in, but just get a name or
Jeff Schlitz typed in one.
Okay.
Now we've got a few, Tom. So let's now I'm anticipating the answer. I like this.
All right. There was actually a tie for the $2.5 to $5 million group. There was a tie. It was Redshaw and it was McCracken.
Well, unfortunately, none of our answerers on the poll got it right. So interesting.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I was there to develop this, and I vaguely remember these names myself. There's so much consolidation today in our industry at the broker level. Same thing occurred over the last 30 years with the agency. There were, I think the first year we did the study, there were 8 to 10 agency management systems that were pretty evenly spread across the landscape. And of course that has changed dramatically, but
right.
I don't know who gobbled up Redshaw and McCracken, but they're long gone. All right, what was the average agency's pro forma profitability? So when we strip out discretionary owner compensation to get a better picture of actual profitability for the agency, for a $2.5 to $5 million agency, what was the average profitability level in 1990?
Go ahead, type it in. If you have a guess.
This is a number. You might say 17%, you might say 6%, you might say whatever percent. This is a percentage. And the reality is, in 1993, the best practices study, the best performing brokers in the country, 12%.
That was in 93.
That's 1993. Today, in the current best practices study, average pro forma profitability for a $2.5 to $5 million agency is 27.2%. So over the last 30 years, profitability, which is one of the key cornerstones of agency value, has more than doubled. And so, we certainly a lot of contributors to that, but technology and otherwise. But one of them for sure has been the best practices study. And I'll get to the history of it in a second, and I'll come back to why this was such jaw-dropping information. But let's do one more question. What was the typical agency revenue, agency value as a multiple of revenue? And so,
all right, I know Ed and Jeff and Claudia, several of you on here, I've been around long enough to know and heard the tales of what these valuations were back in the day. So
yeah,
not today, but back in 93.
1993, and the answer to this question kind of really gets to the history of the best practices study and why we did it. But the answer is
nice guess, Ed.
If you were going to perpetuate internally, if you were going to sell shares to your next gen folks, you would typically sell it at, call it 1.1 times revenue. So if you were $1 million revenue agency, your value might be 1.1 million. If you wanted to go outside and sell it to a third-party buyer, you might sell for 1.4 times. And in our appraisal and M&A practice at Reagan, typically internal agencies, internal valuations today are in that 1.7 range of revenue. So they've gone up significantly. And the external, 2.5 to 3.5 times revenue, depending on the agents in question and the profile is pretty typical. So, and this kind of gets to why we did the best practices study. If you step back to the early 1990s, the Big I was concerned that agency valuations were not reflective of where they should have been, that there was no reason that the values, which had been at this 1 to 1.5, they had been like that for quite some time, and there was a sense that we can do better, we should do better. And so the whole genesis really of the best practices study, which is simply a study where we go out and we gather data about the top performing agents and brokers in the country, and then we put it into the best practices study, which is available either on the Reagan Consulting website if you want to see a digital version. If you want a copy, a physical copy, they're available from the Big I. That's where you get it. But the goal of the study was to show the key benchmarks, operating benchmarks, key performance indicators for top performing agents so that other agents could look at the top performing firms to realize what the potential looked like and begin a process of improving their own results. And so that was really the objective of the best practices study, was to help agents maximize their valuations, whether they were going to sell to the next gen folks or whether what they wanted to go to market. And based on the valuations today, based on the profitability today, I think it's pretty clear that the study did accomplish what we hoped it to accomplish.
Tom, as you transition to the next slide, but I'm just curious, for those agencies that have committed to this process and those agencies that have gone through completely, and what does that look like from a commitment standpoint on time, and certainly how active are the agencies with you as you conduct the study with them?
Yeah, I would say we have seen. You've always got to be careful when one of the great jokes about lawyers and consultants is how can you tell them lying? Their lips are moving. So I'm a consultant, so take it. But we've had the good fortune, Dave, to over the last 30 years to work with many of the top performing brokers in the country. And many of them looked a lot like this in terms of their operating characteristics 30 years ago. And so the best practices study, basically the methodology is measure your own results.
Okay.
Compare them to the best practices study, identify a handful of key operating metrics that you really want to go to work on, and then set your team loose on it. And so it's not it is a very, very engaged and involved process. Okay. The first step really is to score yourself identify where there are performance gaps that need to be addressed, and then begin a process. And many of our clients over the years, one of the things that we do at Reagan, in addition to all the other things, studies and M&A advisory services, et cetera, is strategic planning. And so I'm thinking of a handful of firms that I've been working with for decades where the best practices study was an integral part of the strategic planning engagement. And so, strategic planning typically is a multi-day session where we look at where the objective, where we want to go, and what we're going to do to get there. And increasingly, beginning in the mid-90s, when the best practices study became available, for the first time, we knew definitively what high performance looked like. Prior to that point, if you'd asked me what a typical revenue per employee number or a typical profit, it would be anecdotal responses. For the first time with the best practices study, we could tell you definitively what top performance looked like. So I would say, Dave, long answer to a short question, the firms that have really taken this information to the next level were firms that from the very top down embraced the best practices methodology, which is scoring ourselves, comparing to the best, and then putting plans in place to get better. We've seen firms that have totally transformed themselves by doing so. It's not a quick fix. It's not a one and done endeavor. It's a kind of a lifestyle. Continuous improvement is really what we're looking for. And that will not happen without a very, very specific and committed, approach on the part of agency leadership.
Yeah. Great point. Starts at the top, right, Tom?
That's right. It's funny. I speak at a lot of, I was speaking at an applied session a couple of weeks ago out in Las Vegas, and I had afterwards a couple folks come up who were kind of mid-level managers, and they got really excited about the prospect of measuring and improving and getting better. And a common refrain that we hear is, gosh, if I could just get our owners to get on board, if I could just get them to understand how important this is. And it's interesting because owners should be the ones that would care the most, because
Right.
again, the goals of ownership should be to have the most viable and valuable agency possible. They should be, owners should be the ones that should embrace this the most. But it's interesting. We do hear a lot of times from mid-level folks, gosh, I just wish our owner had been here. I wish our owner could hear this presentation, because without ownership, without a top-down approach, it's very difficult to drive this stuff through.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, folks, if you have questions for Tom as we go through the presentation, we'll certainly, if he doesn't answer them during the presentation, we'll tackle them at the end. And if not, we'll take them offline and get you an answer. So certainly encourage questions. And as Tom goes through his presentation, we'll address them.
All right. Let's take a minute and talk a little bit about the state of the industry right now. I don't know. Oftentimes folks don't know. I don't know if your listeners would understand that in terms of growth and profitability, and again, I've been around for a while, so we've seen a lot of different cycles over the years. In terms of growth and profitability, we are operating at the highest levels that we've ever achieved. This is Q2 data. Reagan Consulting, in addition to the best practices study, does a quarterly study called the Growth and Profitability Survey, where we take the temperature on agents and brokers to determine what their profit levels and growth levels are, so that we get kind of real-time data. It may come as a surprise to many of your listeners that going back to the early 1990s, for as long as we've been measuring this stuff, in terms of growth and profitability levels, the industry is operating at the highest level it ever has. Now, this is Q2 data. You're looking at the top there at those profit margin numbers. They will come down over the course of the year, because Q2 data reflects contingent income, which kind of falls to the bottom line. And so, as the year goes by, we'll see those profit levels dropping off a little bit, but the trending is what's more important. Looking at Q2 data for the last decade or so, We're operating at a very high level in terms of profitability. And maybe the more surprising number is just the growth level. Go back to 2020. Gosh, it was such a scary time with COVID, and many agents and brokers, many in Florida, who depend so heavily on the travel industry, and not a lot of travel was taking place in 2020. Folks were really, really afraid that we were going to have negative growth for the year. And gosh, look at what we did, 4.4% growth, which is not world beating, but think back to the world we were in 2020. I mean, It was pretty remarkable. And then 2021, 22, as the economy recovered, 7.1% organic growth the next year, 2022, 10.2% growth. So just blowing and going. And then through the second quarter of this year, 11.2% organic growth. Now, to be fair, certainly a lot of that is on the heels of rate for sure, but I don't think anyone sitting on the call today would have expected in 2020 that the next 2 to 3 years were going to be the fastest growing and most profitable years our industry have ever experienced. And for somebody who's got a little gray hair now and has been around for a while, I think what it simply does for me is reinforce the value of the independent agent and broker, and just what an incredibly resilient business we find ourselves in. That, if you go back to 2008, 2009, 2010, those were tough years too, but we see a similar story. Agents and brokers were not going out of business the way many of our clients were. We did just fine, even in the worst of times. So it really is a remarkable story, and if nothing else, testament to the value of these businesses and how important they are to the economy.
Yeah. Tom, as certainly we look at these things and create these metrics and talk to agents about this, has there been any dissection about the impact just specific to Florida? We're the Florida Association of Insurance Agents. We get questions all the time of, these studies, and it's, they group the Southeast together and so on and so forth. Is there a way to slice and dice this to get a little more granular for Florida exposure?
We'd be happy. Yeah, we'd be happy to. One of the things we can do with the best practices study is slice and dice it. So if you were to come to us and say, hey, we've got, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we have many best practices agencies in Florida. One of the things we could do for you, Dave, would be to show you a Florida only best practices study that would show growth, profitability, all of the best practices metrics. I need to look at that. I need to make sure from a data standpoint, you've got to have a critical mass.
Right.
I think we've got enough in Florida. It's one of the most vibrant associations that we work with. So I think we would, but yeah, we'd be more than happy to take a look at that. And maybe what we do is, pull together for you a best practices snapshot of just the state of Florida. So you could look at only compare yourselves to other Florida brokers.
Yeah, it's just something. And, that's something probably we'll work with you on, Tom, at FAI. So just a thought. Okay.
The other piece, it's always interesting, and this is, again, a couple really interesting takeaways. Commercial lines did really well. This is the last 6 years. I didn't put a footer on there, but these are last 6 years, 2018 to 2023, what the commercial lines benefits and personal lines organic growth were. One of the things that's interesting in COVID is commercial lines did pretty well. You look at the growth rates, they were, again, in 2020, a little bit low, and I guess we would have expected that, but they bounced back pretty quickly. Employee benefits was interesting in that it really lagged during COVID. It didn't prove to be quite as sticky during COVID as commercial lines, and didn't grow as fast. And we think what happened there was HR leaders just had their hands full with dealing with their employees in a remote environment. It was the worst possible time to switch insurance brokers. And so we didn't see quite so much growth, but gosh, now through the second quarter of this year, 9.3% organic growth. So employee benefits is blowing and going. Commercial lines continues to be blowing and going. But again, we think a big part of that is rate. And then I think the shocker for many of us has been just personal lines, personal lines growth, which historically 2 to 3% has been a pretty good number. The last couple of years, or certainly last year, for the first time ever that we're aware of, personal lines organic growth actually exceeded that of employee benefits and rivaled that of commercial lines P&C, and cooled off a little bit this year. But again, from a valuation standpoint, and it doesn't get much better than this standpoint. I do understand that a hard market creates a lot of challenges in terms of renewals, and we're certainly sensitive to that, especially for many of our clients in Florida. Commercial auto. We're hearing some of the horror stories that you guys are living through. So, although the numbers are good, the reality of your day-to-day lives, I know, are challenging now. But from a valuation and viability standpoint, again, very, very, very good times for independent agents and brokers.
Good point, Tom. So I'll get to a couple questions here as we continue on. So go ahead.
Okay. The other thing that folks are always asking about is, what's going on with deal activity, M&A. One of the things that we do at Reagan is serve as an investment banker and advisor to our clients that are considering perpetuation options, and we work with a lot of folks to look at internal perpetuation, external perpetuation, and help them understand it. So, and we have a pretty good finger on the pulse of the M&A market. As you all know, we've been going through a boom time in terms of agents and brokers selling. Last year, 2022, we saw a pretty significant drop off, down 35% from the prior year. And as many of your listeners know, much of that has to do with just rising interest rates. The most aggressive buyers right now for recent history have been private equity firms that rely very heavily on debt for the models that they run. And so the cost of debt, as you all know, went up significantly last year. And so there was a cooling off, and we've seen that going into this year as well. Through the second quarter of last year, Q3 data actually just came out. We're in the process of compiling it. You'll see a similar drop off. So still a lot of activity, a lot of interest, but there's no getting around it. There are fewer buyers. If a year ago I would have told you there are 50 active buyers in the marketplace, today that number might be 35. So there's still a ton of them, but no question, no getting around it, that M&A deal activity has cooled off this year, and that's okay. It's probably healthy that it would cool off a bit, but definitely slowed down a little bit. Yeah,
it's amazing how you put it that way. Tom, our membership is over 2,000 member agencies here in Florida. And, but yeah, each week, Tom, we still see, a lot of M&A activity within our own ranks. Last week, I was on 2 different calls of groups outside of Florida that are looking to, set up some footprint and some agency stuff here in Florida. So there's still a lot of buzz around it. My perception is it's just taking a little longer. Don't you agree, Tom? It's just some of these transactions and some of these things are just taking a long, and interest rates have something to do with that.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's an interesting time. And again, I think it's very healthy. I mean, the reality is that if you look at these numbers, you go back to 2021, almost 1,000, you might draw the conclusion, as many do, that, everybody is selling. And if you listen to consultants, if you're not selling, you're missing an opportunity. And the reality is that, first of all, everybody is not selling. For the last 30 years, the number of independent agents and brokers in the United States has hovered around 35,000. And even with this consolidation taking place, those numbers have not changed materially. And the reason for that is that we've got a tremendous amount of business generation taking place on the smaller end. We're creating a ton of new agents and brokers to replace those that are selling. Now, obviously, they are smaller because they're just beginning, but the universe is just fine. And despite what you will hear from some in the marketplace, the industry has never been healthier than it is today. And the opportunities for young agents and brokers have never been better. One of the interesting dynamics versus, say, 20 years ago is that back in the day, if you decided you wanted to go your own way as a young broker, one of the challenges was that you couldn't gain access to markets. You couldn't get a job, you couldn't get a Cincinnati appointment. And so what are you going to do? And so you were kind of stuck. And with the aggregators that exist today, these firms, many of them, Keystone, SIA, Secure Risk up here in Georgia is a big name, and they're all over the place. Now, a young agent or broker who decides that they want to go their own way and do their own thing and needs access to markets can find it pretty easily. And so we're actually seeing a ton of young agents and brokers going into business and creating new. So don't fall for the hype that everybody is selling and that the industry is going away. I will tell you this. I joined here 30 years ago. Our founder was a guy named David Hales. He had just retired. He was kind of the father of management consulting in the insurance industry. As a young guy here, I called up David Hales, who had just retired, to talk to him about the business and start to understand it. And I'll never forget, one of the things he told me was, Tom, the one thing you need to understand about our industry is there will always be people telling us that our better days are behind us. Now, this is 30 years ago. And so it was true then and it's true now. There are many that will tell you that, our brighter days are behind us and better get while the getting is good. And it's simply not true. It certainly has not been true for the last 30 years. I can make a killer argument with any of your listeners as to why staying in business, retaining ownership of your company may be the very best strategy for you. So just be careful who you're listening to and what their motivations may be. There are a lot of folks out there that benefit greatly from M&A activity, and Reagan certainly gets a fair share of that. But just be careful who you listen to and consider their motivations to make sure that you're getting the real skinny on the reality. And the reality is there's never been a better time to be an independent insurance broker.
So Tom, I guess you're telling us InsurTech is not going to do away with the agency distribution channel?
No, it's funny that you say that, because I remember sitting in a meeting in probably 1997, 1998. This new technology had emerged that everybody was trying to understand, called the internet. And it was like, what the heck is this thing? And what does it mean? And, Amazon had popped on and heard the CEO of Aon in a presentation, talking about what kept him up at night. And his fear at that point was that the internet was going to lead to disintermediation of the independent agent and broker, meaning that, customers were going to be able to go direct to the carriers to get what they needed, and then that the role of the independent agent, was going to be displaced. And, sure enough, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal in 1996 where the state insurance commissioner of Texas referred to the independent agent and broker as the buggy whip maker for, of the next century. And so there were a lot of very knowledgeable people that were assuming that this radical technology called the internet was going to displace agents and brokers. And what we've seen over the last 30 years is just the opposite.
Right.
Certainly has improved the way we do business, but I think the same will be true with InsurTech. It will improve the way we do business. I think if we've learned anything, is the role of the trusted advisor is not a role that lends itself to a technology solution other than in certain limited circumstances. So if I could list 17 things that keep me up at night, InsurTech would probably be number 18.
Well, and just to put a bow on what you said about the growth, Tom, we are seeing, as many agencies that we see sell and consolidate within our ranks, we're also seeing the growth of startups, people that have either completed their earnout or have just decided, hey, I've been out of the game for a long time, or I have a family member that I would like to show the way. And so we're really starting to see that with among our ranks of new members here in Florida, for sure.
Yeah, let me just make a shameless pitch here for a second. One of the things that is cool about the best practices study is, and again, these are available from the Big I. Every year when we're presenting the data, we actually also write a white paper on the front end to kind of address an issue of importance. One of the ones that we did a couple, 3 years ago, and you can find this on our website as well, is for a new generation of best practices folks. People in my generation, we know of the best practices study, we know of its importance, but you think about those young agents or brokers that are
Right.
just getting into business in their 20s and early 30s, maybe not knowing what metrics to focus on and why is revenue per employee important? Why is profitability? Why do these metrics matter? One of the things that we did a few years ago was a reboot on the study, why it matters and how to measure it and how to use it. And so I would just encourage any younger agents or brokers or folks that are kind of building their businesses, maybe in the earlier stages of their career, get copies of the best practices study every year, to measure your own performance, but more importantly in this regard, to become educated on why these metrics matter and how to think about them and how are they defined. And again, if I were a young agent or broker, I would grab a copy of the best practices study and I call Tom Doran at Reagan and say, hey, if you were me, what would the 7 or 8 metrics be that I should most focus on for the next 5 years? I think that's a really, really important kind of use of time. And again, those resources are available from the Big I with the best practices study. Great educational resources for your younger leaders.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Tom. We talk about it. We always preach what is the best practices approach to how you handle yourself, how you conduct yourself, how you transact insurance, and certainly from our perspective, being a Westport provider of E&O insurance here in Florida, what is the best practices to protect your E&O exposure, right? Because that's a policy that is costly. And certainly having claims can disrupt the flow of your business. So best practices all around is what many strive for. So, and I guess just transitioning, Tom, where is the broker landscape headed?
Yeah, it's a great. I was just actually listening to a podcast earlier today, and the presenter was referring to the folly of trying to predict the future. So, it's interesting. If you'd asked me in 2020, what did the future look like? I never would have pointed to results that looked anything like this. So take all of this with a grain of salt. But we spent a lot of time talking to agents and brokers about what their concerns are. And so take this with a grain of salt. No one can predict the future, but let's look at some of the things that we believe to be true because of all of the acquisition activity over the last decade or so, and it's been nothing short of remarkable. Many geographies now lack a clear privately held, broker leader. So if you'd come to Atlanta 15 years ago, there were 4 or 5 mega firms that were just dominating the marketplace. That's not so true anymore. So if I'm a broker in Sarasota or Tampa or Jacksonville, there are some real opportunities that exist for independents to grow and become the dominant players in their marketplace. And I'll touch in a minute on how we think you're going to do that and what you will need to do to accomplish that.
Right.
And it has to do with hiring and developing next-gen talent, but it does create an opportunity. There are many high-volume acquirers that are sidelined right now with capital constraints. This has to do with, again, a lot of the debt issues that are going on right now. So many of the most active players that you would be aware of, and I won't name names, but you know who they are, the private equity buyers. Many of them call you or were calling you weekly, it seems like, to try to do a deal with you. they're really refocused today, many of them, on operational issues rather than rapid growth. So if there was a firm that used to call you every couple weeks and was driving you crazy and you haven't heard from them for a while, that's probably why it is. They're tending to internal issues right now in terms of operational integration and kind of getting up to speed. So a lot of the acquirers have stepped out of the marketplace. This does create an opportunity for some of your listeners who have been priced out of the M&A market, is that there may be local M&A opportunities that will reemerge for our independent firms that the competition is ratcheting down a little bit. Now, I will tell you, although we've seen deal volume drop off materially, it's still at a very healthy level, but valuations have not come down yet. So one would expect in a supply and demand world that at some point, if the demand for brokers is diminishing, that if the supply is not diminishing, that the valuations will go down. As of right now, we have not seen that. So there are not any bargains necessarily that are available, but there certainly is less competition. Valuations, who knows where they go in the future? They are at all-time highs right now. What we would say for best practices, well-run, focused, quality firms, valuation premium does exist today, and will continue to exist. So again, don't feel like you're missing out if you're not doing something right now. There will always be a strong valuation available for best practices caliber firms. One of the things that you've got to figure out is how to compete with scale. If you're a $2 or $3 million agency, the big guys, and I'm going to steer back here for a minute, these are the billion-dollar brokers. Very few of it, existed 20 years ago. This is the world we live in. We think about $18 billion brokers on the right there, and there are a bunch of them right behind them coming up. So within no time, there will be 25, billion-dollar brokers competing in the marketplace, and they bring with them a lot of scale and a lot of money to invest in tools and resources, technologies, development programs, loss control engineers, claims, all of the stuff that, on the benefit side, ACA compliance has been a huge boon to large scaled firms being able to supply ERISA attorneys and all of that stuff. So competing with these scaled agencies, large brokers, has been a challenge, and there are some very creative ways to do it. And maybe that's a good topic for another day, is how to compete with scale. But if you are thinking the next 10 years are going to look like the last 10 years in terms of competitive landscape, you're likely to be surprised there, right, because the big guys are coming, and they've got a lot of tools and resources, and the smaller agencies can compete very well with these firms, but have to adapt to be able to do it. And then finally, this is kind of one of the new things that your listeners will be experiencing from a competitive standpoint, is the big guys, the big private equity firms in particular, coming down into our agents and brokers and picking off our best producers with a concept called a producer lift out. This is a real big issue for our industry right now. Again, there are some very creative ways to address that. And again, the future is bright, but we got to continue to adapt to the realities that we've got. And if there's one area that I'm particularly concerned with right now, it's just securing talent, young talent in particular. I think if there was something that's not happening at the level that we need and want to see it happening right now, it's perpetuation planning. 10 or 15 years ago, Dave, a big part of what we would do at Reagan would be working with our clients to develop a plan to perpetuate internally. A lot of that planning is going by the wayside over the last decade. There's been so much focus on external activity, selling to but many of your listeners, probably a vast majority, still intend to perpetuate internally. But what I'll tell you is, if you don't have a plan to do it, it's highly unlikely that it will actually happen. If you are an agency owner, assuming that your 28, 30, 35-year-old producers who you haven't gotten around to developing a perpetuation plan for are not being solicited by these large private equity firms, you're likely to wake up and find that maybe some of your best talent is getting siphoned off. And so, one of the things we would encourage all of our listeners to do would be to make sure that you are developing strategies to lock down, to attract and lock down your top talent. Hope is not a strategy. Hoping that we'll figure it out at some point in the future. Hoping that our next gen folks will hang in there with us while we get around to it. Not a great strategy. And we've got a client, about a $3 million firm, who had an $800,000 revenue producer that they had been talking to for extended period of time. We'll get there. And they came in on a Monday morning and he was gone and had moved over to a private equity firm that had lifted him out and created some compelling economics to do so. So if there was one real important thing I want to encourage your folks to be focused on, is making sure that you are engaging in perpetuation planning. And the good news about perpetuation planning is the same things need to happen whether you're going to sell externally ultimately or internally. And so it's all important to do, but doing nothing in this environment is perhaps the worst strategy in terms of ensuring the future of your firm. And this is the one that concerns me, is that agents and brokers are not focused on developing a perpetuation plan, developing a methodology to attract and retain top talent. And so this is the one that spooks me a little bit, the lack of attention that's being spent here. So if again, I'm not intending really to be a sales guy too much here, but if anyone needs help to think about perpetuation planning, how to do it, and how to think about locking down top talent, just reach out to me and let me know, and we'll be happy to dive in with you and help you think through what some of the strategies might be.
Yeah, great point, Tom, and certainly any of the guests on Friday Morning Live, if you'd like to reach out to Tom directly or go through us, we'll be more than happy to put you in touch with Tom, and he can certainly walk you through what they have to offer from their team and so on and so forth. And but as again, encourage questions. So if you have a question of Tom, please go ahead and post it. But one of the things we talked about, Tom, the other day, and certainly that we've thought about, as you're looking to perpetuate internally or externally, whatever, and how do you measure against your peers, right? And the best practices study helps you do that.
That's right.
So being engaged. Right. So that's why it matters, right, Tom? That's why the best practices study matters, because you can develop so much information as you look internally or externally. But if you don't know what you're looking at or what some of those metrics mean when you're having these conversations, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But so why, again, from your standpoint, why does the best practices study matter? Why is it so important to agents to get a copy each year, to go through the summary, to engage in the process if they want to, right? To put their name in the hat, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I just think, we all have a destination in mind
right.
with regard to our businesses. We want to be vibrant. We want to deliver great value to our customers. We want to take great care of our people. We want to generate a strong investment return for the folks that own our businesses. And we want to create a great career path for the young agents and brokers that have partnered with us. And in order to execute on all of those objectives, to do that without a strong understanding of what greatness in our industry looks like, or what top tier performers look like, um, if you aim for nothing, that's exactly what you're going to get. And if you're just kind of operating day to day, assuming the future will take care of itself, I mean, I think the best practices study is perhaps the best methodology to ensure that you don't have your head buried in the sand. And we all have this tendency, I certainly do, that assuming that the way the world operated 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, is the same the world is changing, and in order to be able to execute on all of those measures, you're going to have to be a top tier level agency. And there's no way to measure yourself in the industry against the best of the best to begin that process of continuous improvement without participating in the best practices study. One of the cool things, Dave, and I know you're aware of this, but we do publish the study every year, and that's helpful. But one of the cool things is that if you participate in the study, one of the things you have to do is you have to supply us with all of your operating and financial data. And that we use that data, obviously, to prepare the benchmarks that we report on. But one of the cool things that you get out of that is we send back to you a customized report for your agency for all of the best practices metrics to show your performance versus that of the industry. So you don't have to go through the additional hard work of just getting the data and then figuring out how you compare. It's one of the outputs of the study. And again, one of the things that you've got to be doing is engaging in a periodic strategic planning session. If I owned an agency, I'd be doing it annually. And the cornerstone of that would be my best practices study that would show all of our results laid out clearly next to the best performers in the industry of our revenue size. And by doing so, we can very easily identify where the issues are that we get to work on. But if you're not committed to that continuous improvement, and if you're assuming, that the future is going to look exactly like the past, there was an old commercial for Oldsmobiles. This is not your father's Oldsmobile. The world is changing, and we've got to change with it. And we think the best way to measure ourselves and to engage in that positive change is by strict adherence to the best practices study. Should be the Bible of your insurance agency operations. And if it's not, we'd really question whether or not that's wise.
Right. A question came in, Tom. We FAI is partnered with the North Carolina Association through an IA-MBA program. You may be familiar with it. Goalmakers is the group that the North Carolina Association partner with, and many of our members are going through that program right now. And one of the members is asking on there, and they're actually referring to the best practices study during this session or these latest sessions with the group. But one part of the discussion I thought was interesting was the profit margin may not be the total goal if money isn't being spent on growth. Does the best practices program go into that in more detail?
That's a great observation. As a valuation guy, one of the things that we do at Reagan is we do valuation work for our clients that are privately held and need someone to set a price so that they can transact stock internally. And if you understand the mathematics behind it, growth has a 2-to-1 is 100% more valuable in terms of driving agency value than profitability. And so what you realize if you understand that math is that we're happy to give up a little profit in order to spur growth. If you're obviously you definitely want to maintain a certain level of profitability, but if push came to shove and you had only one way to spend $1, would it be to drop it to the bottom line, reflect it as profit, or invest in growth initiatives? And those growth initiatives would be broad. A lot of the growth investments that a wise broker is making. Technology is certainly a big one. Membership with associations like FIAI, the best practices study investment would be super important. One that we love, you mentioned Roger Sitkins recently. Gosh, maybe the first $1 I would spend every year would be with a really high, a very talented sales training, developing our young producers to achieve their potential. And again, you can see that potential in the best practices study. What is a good new revenue number for a commercial lines producer, a benefits producer? Guys like Roger and others that are in that industry, that's a critical importance at hiring and developing young producers. So your listener is 100% correct. Investing in growth is more important than investing in profitability. But having said that, a certain level of profitability is required. And so the beauty of the best practices study is you can go in and see these are top tier growth organizations. You can still see for each of them, what is the level of profitability they're able to accomplish at the same time growing. So, but yeah, growth is more important, but profitability matters too.
Right. Well, as we conclude today's session, Tom, again, thanks for being on. But one of the things you mentioned earlier, there's 17 things that keep you up at night, and number 18 was InsurTech. But as again, you've been around the industry a long time. You author this study. You talk to agents. You consult. What keeps Tom Doran up at night? What do we face, or what are you thinking? Agents need to be aware of as they look at the landscape of their agency over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean there are a few that rise to consideration. Consolidation, the competing with scale is a big deal right now. But again, Dave, the thing that I don't see happening today that I did see happening 15, 20 years ago is a commitment at the senior level around strategic planning with a rigid methodology around best practices, and also as a part of that strategic planning, perpetuation planning. I think that the vast majority of your members would tell you, if push came to shove, our preference is to perpetuate internally. But if they were honest, they would say, but we don't have a plan to do that. We'll get to it. And that again, hope is not a strategy. I'm the biggest procrastinator probably at Reagan Consulting, so this cuts me the same way. But assuming that we can get around to these things and it won't come back to bite us in the tail that's the one that worries me, is just a lack of planning for the future, clearly identifying where it is that we're trying to get to and what the strategies are that allow us to get there. And again, that's a big part of what we do. And if somebody wants to understand the strategic planning process or perpetuation planning, let me know. But that piece of the puzzle, I think, is increasingly missing right now. And that's going to come back to bite many of us in the tail.
Yeah, it is amazing on that point, Tom. As many agents as we talk to and as many members that we have for the association, when we have these discussions, it is kind of put on the back burner, right? We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, we had a plan, but I had to do some other things. I had to take care of this first, and so it seems like that conversation, you're right, over the last few years has been pushed down the to-do list more and more.
Well, and to be fair, we've kind of been busy.
Yeah, I hear you.
We had COVID. That was a minor little roadblock, and we're working remotely, and we've had our hands full just keeping the train on the tracks. And so I don't mean to be overly critical with that, other than to say, again, there is a new reality that we're up against. The competition for talent has never been as strong as it is right now.
Right.
Your members know that. They deal with that as well.
Yep.
Make sure that you have done everything within your power to ensure that your young agents and brokers, who are critically important to your future, that there is a plan in place to ensure that they're going to be with you for the long haul. And that's a real concern for our industry right now, and one that our members really want to stay on top of first and foremost.
Well, and we all know that that's the talent that when acquiring entities are looking at that agency, right? that's part of the discussion, the due diligence, is that talent.
Yeah. If you're
Good.
Yeah, if you're an agency where your agents and brokers, your entire producer team, we talk in terms of classes. Freshman class is underage, 35 to 40 is sophomore class, 45 to 50 I think is juniors, and then above that is seniors. A buyer will want to see all four classes well represented. So if you go to market and you've got a handful of agents and brokers that are above age 55 or 60, there is a discounting that will take place there.
Right.
So it's very important to think in terms of generations. And again, best practices study is great in that it shows for best practices agencies of their production team, how many freshmen do we have? How many sophomores? How many juniors? And that's super important information. But don't think that you can get a premium valuation in the marketplace today without all four of the generations being represented, including that freshman class.
Yep. It's a great point, Tom. Well, thanks again for being on, Tom. I really appreciate it. Certainly, folks, go on Tom's website, Reagan Consulting, get on the big I, get the study, dissect it, reach out to Tom with questions. Certainly, if you have anything that we can help you with at FAI, just go ahead and ping me and be glad to help in any way we can, point you in the right direction. But as Tom said, these are critical times for certain things and agency valuations, but perpetuation and workforce, right? People, it seems to be the two driving concepts right now. And so we just got to keep pushing forward, bringing guests like Tom on and others to help agency owners and operators make their agency the best it can be and the most valuable by using best practices. So again, Tom, thanks. Guys, have a great weekend. Enjoy some college football, and we'll see you in a couple weeks on the 17th with our friends from Kroll. With that, Dave Newell signing off, Friday Morning Live. Take care.